Having surpassed 1,000 completed anime, it's time to review my old favorites and find out what holds up. I'm Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this is Anime Favorite Search. Steins is an anime about a group of college students who end up inventing a microwave that allows them to send text messages back in time, which then allows them to meddle with jumping across timelines in ways they definitely shouldn't, while also picking up a world-famous scientist who happens to be around their same age, who also joins to help out with the time machine, but also picking up the attention of CERN, spelled with an S because I guess they didn't want to get sued, who wants to use it to conquer the world via time travel, which we find out that they totally do. Steins Gate is an anime that is famous enough and iconic enough that I feel like with Fate Stay Night, I don't need to get super in-depth with the summary. I feel like I can just take it on faith that most people know Steins Gate. It is worth noting that Steins Gate is the second of the science adventure series, following up Chaos Head, and as I said in my Chaos Head review, I actually watched Steins Gate as it was airing week to week because that was something I did back then, specifically because it had a similar naming convention to Chaos Head, which I was really into at the time. And so when it started airing, I was like, oh, I gotta check this out. And then the first episode had me immediately hooked, and I know the exact moment I was like, Steins Gate has got me, I gotta keep watching this every week, is when that opening plays in the first episode, which is Hacking to the Gate by Kanako Ito. That song slaps to this fucking day, and that was the exact moment where I was like, oh my god, everything about this anime is fucking great. While we're giving shout-outs, I might also have to say that I love all of the characters with a little bit of a caveat we'll get into in a second, but I really appreciate the character designs by Yuke, where all of the characters look realistic, but unlike other anime where the characters have this sort of like realist vibe to them, all of the characters are also visually enough distinguishable that you can tell them apart from another cast of anime characters. So it manages to have this sort of visual style while also keeping itself realistic, which is something that I'm not sure any other anime has done quite as well as Steins Gate. Outside of just the character designs, though, the characters themselves are pretty much all fantastic. I don't think there is a single character I dislike, although I am not so much of a fan of some characters, some of which just aren't super developed, like Braun and his daughter, which I understand get more playtime in the visual novel, but not what we're reviewing. I think the only character that's like main cast that I'm not the biggest fan of is Ruka. Actually, you know what? Let's just get into the Ruka problem right now. So Ruka's storyline is probably the only storyline I think of in Steins Gate as they jump through the timelines that I think might actually be a bit of a misfire, because Ruka's storyline is essentially about having a crush on the main character. And the problem with Ruka is that he has this sort of like internalized homophobia, because as the show makes fairly clear, and I believe the visual novel makes even clearer, Ruka isn't like a trans woman. Ruka just has a crush on the main character and can't reconcile in his head with his feelings for this other man while also being a man. He literally cannot wrap his fucking head around it. And so this results in him trying to change his gender, which it turns into a totally serviceable timeline, but the characters who are trying to present as another gender for reasons other than identity is a plotline that you see a lot, not necessarily a lot, but fairly often in Japanese media, and it is a plotline that I'm sure you can do well, but I've never really seen it done satisfactory, and I do think Steins Gate is not the exception. I think whether it's that the character is just gay and is repressing their gay feelings, or whether they're dressing as a woman to not get bullied, or whether they're doing it because they admire another character, I think doing it for reasons outside of identity issues, or specifically changing their gender because of these reasons, not necessarily like cross-dressing because they have to pretend to be like a man or a woman for whatever reasons the plot demands at that moment, is a hard-to-do plot line that is very easy to fuck up. And I think it can lead to a lot of unnecessary confusion, and those plots are usually best avoided, which unfortunately Steins Gate does not. And so I think Ruka's repressed homosexuality, especially because it's not properly explored, is, if anything, the only major detraction from Steins Gate, and is the only plot line I don't necessarily vibe with. I think the other characters' D-mails and how that informs their characters, such as Ferris changing Akihabara, I think that's a fucking moment when you notice the entire city has changed. I think Moeka and the whole FB situation, I think all of that is handled perfectly well. It's just specifically the Ruka stuff that gets a little weird. The only other issue I may really have with Steins Gate is that the time travel is pretty inconsistent. Sometimes, like, the explanation they give for time travel is that it always jumps you into a different timeline, which would make sense if they just kept with that, but they don't, because sometimes timelines are rewritten Back to the Future style, and sometimes there's a certain level of certainty in timelines where things have to happen, sort of Nivakavian time travel, like Harry Potter. And the fact that they don't just stick with the one type of time travel that they specifically say leads to a whole bunch of inconsistencies as far as the time travel actually works, which would normally kill my enjoyment of any other series. And I think it actually speaks to Steins Gate's quality that something like that would normally be like, this fucking sucks, all about, like, the fact that I'm still on board actually says something about how well Steins Gate handles its plot lines and characters. Although, speaking of time travel and its plot lines, I have always hated the concept of sort of fixed anchor points in timelines, like the one where Mayuri has to die. That's always been one of those, like, plot lines that sort of gets under my skin. And even with Steins Gate, I'm not super jived about it. I think they handle it about as well as it could, but it always feels like a sort of way to create artificial tension to me. There's also stuff that I feel like was sort of left on the cutting room floor from, like, the visual novel perspective, because occasionally Rintaro will have these sort of like flashbacks where he's talking to either Kirisu or he's talking to Mayuri from like a million years in the future where they've been time jumping a bunch, and that just these like visions never really play into the story. There's also the dream he had as a kid, which gives him his reading Steiner, which isn't properly explored. I think they address it in Steins Gate Zero, but if I can never watch Steins Gate Zero again, that would be totally fine with me, so I'm not going to invest in that. It was plot lines too hard. I will have to say that I do think that even though it uses some cheap tactics, I think there is plenty of dramatic tension. I think they do it quite well. And I think it manages to not get too dark because of the strongest suit of Steins Gate, which is its characters and the banter between these characters. These are the type of characters where this didn't need to be a time travel plot. I would just watch these fucking assholes goof off in a fucking lab making really shitty drones, and it would be a totally acceptable show. I think the sci-fi adventure time travel plot line is just like icing on the cake, which really helps elevate Steins Gate another level above. I mean, this show is absolutely iconic for a reason. I still quote this show to this day, like 13 years after it came out. And so, yeah, I think Steins Gate probably has a lot more issues that I become more and more aware of every time I rewatch the show, as it's one of the few shows that I do rewatch relatively regularly. But I think what it does well, the characters, the audio, the sort of like tension, I think it has really good directing. I think what Steins Gate does well more than compensates a few negative points, and I think it is considered a classic, not just by me, but by most people for a reason. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye.